So, what would it look like if we actually completed the first part of the Great Commission in this generation? To really grasp how momentous this season could be, it's important to once again look at history. As we do, it not only gives us more faith as we see the challenges and victories of previous generations, but it also provides hints at the absolute enormity of the upcoming move of God, should we choose to partner with him.
Yeah, this season is going to be one of the most significant in history.
Yeah.
One way or another.
Come on.
That really becomes apparent as we study historical church growth. As we mentioned earlier, one of the significant factors of Christ's coming during the Pax Romana was that it was such a long unipolar season.
Yeah.
This was crucial in the establishment of the early church, allowing her the time to gain real traction. I mean, by the time all the original apostles had died in 100 AD, Christianity had only grown to about 1% of the world's population.
Yeah.
But by the time Rome had collapsed in 476 AD, it had exploded to 20%.
Wow. And while the Catholic monastic movements did maintain the sodality, the mobile or mission structure of the church, Christianity went into global decline for over 700 years until the Pax Mongolica rose to preeminence. In this roughly 150-year period, both Catholic and Celtic monks, they got to work and saw that percentage increase from 17 to 24%. But when the Mongolian Empire collapsed, the global church went into decline again and slumped back down to 18% of the world's population. During this slump, however, the Protestant Reformation happened.
Yeah, and that was great for the purification of the church, but didn't do much for the global growth of the church. If anything, it actually set us back as Luther abandoned the sodality, creating an attractional rather than missional church philosophy for over 250 years.
Yeah.
But what is incredible is that in the 1790s, the first wave of modern missions was launched by William Carey, and an intense religious renewal occurred in Britain right as she became the world's unipolar power around the beginning of the 1800s.
Wow. Now, think about that. A religious fervor born from a call to missions occurred in England right as the Bloody Revolution occurred in France, thus ending the bipolar season as France collapsed, creating Britain's unipolar moment. Truly, righteousness exalts a nation.
Yeah.
It was religious renewal which transformed the British Empire, ushered in the Pax Britannica, abolished the highly profitable slave trade in 1833, and now, with a restored sodality, Protestantism sent missionaries to colonies around the world. This first wave of modern missions, nicknamed the Coastlands, ran from 1790s through the 1850s and produced significant global church growth.
Yeah, but the church wasn't done yet. The Pax Britannica held until 1914, allowing a second wave of modern missions to launch.
Yeah.
This wave, nicknamed the Inlands, was led by noteworthy missionaries like David Livingstone and Hudson Taylor, and ran from the 1850s into the 1930s. It's during this wave that the student volunteer movement occurred, incredibly launching 100,000 young people into the mission field.
Wow.
By the time the British Empire collapsed at the start of World War I, the church had grown from 18 to 34% of the world's population. A truly astonishing feat.
I love it. But unfortunately, the following multipolar and bipolar seasons were absolutely brutal and caused the largest global decline in history, with Christianity plummeting from 34% to 25% of the world's population. During the slump, the third wave of modern missions began, but it had to wait until the next unipolar moment before it could have its day in the sun. This wave, nicknamed the Unreached, it ran from the 1930s to the 2000s and was led by Donald McGavran, Cameron Townsend, and Ralph Winter, as the church began to realize that to complete the Great Commission, we had to start thinking in terms of people groups rather than geographic regions.
Yeah. And while the church was rediscovering the biblical importance of ethno-linguistic groups and identifying who they were and where they lived, world population numbers began to skyrocket. I mean, at the collapse of the Pax Britannica, the world only had about 1.6 billion people in it.
Yeah.
But in the early 1990s, at the advent of the Pax Americana, there were over 5.2 billion people.
Wow.
So when communism collapsed and America became the next unipolar power, the church didn't just explode, it went absolutely nuclear. In just one decade of mission sending from 1990 to the year 2000, global Christianity increased from 25% to 33% of the world's population.
Wow. Yeah. And so, as we mentioned before, numerically speaking, due to the population growth, more people came into the kingdom in those 10 years than the previous 1,990 years combined. As we look at each unipolar season in history, we see a clear pattern. Each season of church growth is larger than the previous, and this echoing the prophecy given in Isaiah that there will be no end to the increase of his government.
Yeah, not only that, but each season of the church growth occurs in a shorter time frame than the previous. So here we are with the Pax Americana waning, but our light not yet set.
Yeah.
Though we are terminally ill and the prognosis is dire, if we cry out to God like King Hezekiah, God may also grant us 15 more years. If he does, and we return to righteousness, what the church could witness in the fourth wave of modern missions would absolutely dwarf what we saw from 1990 to 2000.
Yes.
This new wave is the call to all, empowering every Christian to disciple each of the 7 spheres of society, teaching them all that God has commanded, and sending the good news to the last remaining unreached people groups of the earth.
Yes, and to do that and complete the first part of the Great Commission, we need to send around 200,000 new missionaries. That's less than 1% of the local church in America being sent out to the most spiritually needy regions of the world. We have the people, we have the resources. Consider the fact that in the late 1800s, the student volunteer movement launched 100,000 new young missionaries to the field with only a tiny fraction of the church membership and the finances we have today. We really could be the generation who finishes what Christ started 2,000 years ago.
Yeah, but will we? Will we choose selfishness or self-sacrifice, comfort or commission, decadence or dedication? Time is ticking, history is cycling, and eternity is waiting.
Yeah, things look pretty grim right now, and turning it around would be a monumental task. It's extremely difficult to turn the tide of the rapidly shifting cultural, political, economic, and spiritual currents. It may seem impossible because America is decadent and ripe for collapse, but history does show that a religious renewal changed the course of Britain, ushered in a unipolar season, restored the sodality, and launched not just one, but 2 great missions movements. We believe it can happen again.
And history shows it can happen again.
Yeah.
It would take great discipline and resolve because a religious renewal during decadence would be completely unprecedented in history.
Yeah.
But as Hudson Taylor once said, I have found that there are 3 stages in every great work of God. First, it is impossible. Then, it is difficult. Then, it is done.
Hey, I'm Josh.
I'm Joshua.
Thanks for watching the 11th installment of this series as we discuss the potential completion of the Great Commission.
And now join the movement as we venture to change the course of history.